Folks, thanks a lot for coming. I appreciate the interest, as I'm sure the gentlemen do as well. We're going to be talking about Marvel in the 70s, but also, come on, these guys have had decades since the 70s, and we could talk about whatever you want to talk about. My name is John Suntress. I have a podcast called Word Balloon. It's at wordballoon.com, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing all these gentlemen that are on the panel, and even Al Milgrom on the phone recently, about 2 weeks ago. What an entrance. I'm telling you.
Sword of Omens, come to my hand. I, Lion-O, command it. Thundercats, ho!
Al Milgrom, ladies and gentlemen, standing up. Give him the, there you go.
Sorry I'm late. They didn't send anybody to watch my table. And the guy they sent was just going to bring me here. So I said, no, you watch the table. I'll find it.
There you go.
Here's lunch.
Yeah, beautiful. Right next to Al. Fantastic writer for many years and still doing great. And I'm so glad he's back in comics. Steve Englehart, ladies and gentlemen. And last but not least, certainly the father of Thanos, Drax, Starfire? Firefox. Eros, of course, the original name, indeed. Indeed, let's Star Fox, but Eros.
I'm not approved. I will say Eros.
There you go. I'm Greek, so I appreciate the Eros there. Jim Starlin, everybody. So, honestly, I do want to talk, obviously, about what you guys wrote in the 70s, but Jim and Al, you guys were boyhood friends, right?
Excuse me, that's Jim and I.
Yes.
Or as I used to sign our covers, Gemini.
Oh, I like that.
What a pun.
So, who met who first, or how did the meeting happen, the meeting of minds?
I met him first. He met me several years later.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't know, but I like the answer.
I tried to pretend I didn't know him. I tried to pretend I didn't know him for the longest time.
Same grade?
You were in the same grade.
Yes.
Junior
But then
high?
Jim was degraded, so.
Yeah.
Junior high?
Junior high. I ran with
Sixth?
No, our junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th grades.
Okay.
So we were, 13, 14 maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Cool.
I ran with a crowd that didn't read, let alone read comics.
So if they were going to read anything, they would have read comics.
Yeah, well, they didn't even get that far. And Alan would run up to me and go, "Have you seen the new Fantastic Four?" And I go, "Will you be quiet?"
Don't let on. Was the stigma there?
He would say, call me later at home. And I said, what, don't your friends know you read comics? He said, if they knew I was reading comics, they'd beat the shit out of me. and they would have, too. Jim was tough enough, but these guys were Neanderthals. They were just big, tough.
Well, it was Detroit.
Yeah,
That's true. Exactly. Thank you, Steve. Very
and he
true
wasn't
point.
kidding about the Neanderthals. There was a lot of beef with maggots in it, so that was that's what the Neanderthal dinner. That's what they've been finding.
Oh, yeah? Really?
Yeah, just
Well,
I'm
protein is
not
protein,
making
I guess.
it. It was ultra protein actually. Ultra protein.
Did you guys go to New York together? Was that the plan? I mean, how did you guys make the move from New York or Detroit to New York?
I sold two two-page stories to Joe Orlando, and I went there, and then work was coming, and I called him up and said, "You ought to come too." And we were sharing a house with some other folks in Staten Island, and you moved in. Who else was there? Dubay and
It was Bill DeBay. It was Steve Skates. It was Mike Friedrich.
Oh, that's right. Mike was there. Yes,
And
I keep forgetting about him.
so wait, and that would have been Mike, you,
Five.
Steve, and DeBay would have been the four. And Mike Friedrich, who was a writer, and he felt like he'd established himself in the business already after 12 minutes. And he said, "I'm going to move back to California." I don't think he liked New York at all. And so he left, and so there was a room available. And so they invited me to take over. There were four rooms for one for each of the roommates, and he invited me to take it over. And nobody wanted to pay the extra rent, so I got in.
I think we only lasted another couple months there.
It wasn't long. It's like I came back to the apartment one day. Everybody had moved out. What the hell happened? It was the work. Jim was getting work already because he was that much better than I, but I got a job doing backgrounds for Murphy Anderson, who was a, very well-established artist for DC Comics. He'd been around since the late 40s. He had done the Buck Rogers newspaper strip, and at this point in his career, he was doing inking mostly over Kurt Swan on Superman, and Irv Novick on Batman, I believe, and various. He had inked Carmine Infantino on The Flash, and Gil Kane on The Atom and Green Lantern. So he was an old pro, and when I say old, I think it was probably 42 at the time. So I thought, oh my God, imagine having that long a career in comics. Now I'm thinking, good Lord, I've outlived him by how many years now? It's crazy. But I was doing backgrounds for Murphy, and Jim and I had been doing. We did stuff in high school. I met Jim. He was so much better than I was. I said, I'll just ink his stuff. Why am I trying? So, but eventually I got up the gumption to try and do penciling as well. But Jim was working for Marvel, and I showed my stuff to Carmine at DC, and he said, "Oh, you guys are a great team. Do you think we could get the two of you working together over here at DC?" And I said, "Well, I can't speak for Jim." I said, "I don't know. He's getting work on his own over there. He's pretty happy." So Carmine said, "They're going to ruin him anyway." I said, "That was a funny about face. Can we get you two talented guys?" "He's no good. They'll ruin him." They didn't. So anyway, but Jim got a job doing a backup story at DC on a book called Sword of Sorcery, because I guess Sword and Sorcery was too generic, and so they made there was a Sword of Sorcery. And it was an adaptation of the Fafford and the Grey Mouser stories by Fritz Leiber. Lieber. And Jim, it was a Grey Mouser story, and Jim drew the heck out of it, and it was tight as hell. I just sort of poured the ink on the page and then wiped away the bare areas, and it was terrific. And based on that,
Not true. He did a lot of work on it.
it was. I'm not saying it wasn't hard, but it was very tightly penciled, and and then Jim dragged me over to Marvel with him, and he introduced me to John Verpoorten, who was the production manager at the time.
Yep.
Big, heavy-set guy. He'd be sitting there in his
He was
office.
a giant.
A giant guy. He was 6'5" and weighed, I don't know. I shudder to think what he weighed, but and he's sitting there proofreading a stack of originals, and Jim knocks on his door and he says, "Hey, John." He looked up over his little reading glasses. "Yeah, Jim?" He says, "This is Al Milgrom. He's going to be inking Captain Marvel from now on." And John went back to proofreading. So it was not a tough process. It was not a lot of oversight there. Jim said, "I think he's good. Let's use him." And next thing you know, I'm working for Marvel Comics.
That's beautiful.
And then a month later, they transferred him over to somebody else. Every issue, I had a different inker on that book.
Yeah. Well, no, that was before me.
And after you, too.
I did several, and then Dan Green. Klaus did one. Dan Green did one.
And then Jack Abel.
Jack Abel did
Every
one.
time-
Oh, I thought you were just tired of me already.
I think you did too. No, this was all John.
Let's-
John was always screwing things up.
Steve, I feel bad. We've gone on a tangent, but when did you break in, and what was your first gigs in the 70s? It was the 70s, right, that you broke in?
Yeah. Well, I started as Neal Adams' assistant. I was in the Army in Maryland, and these days I cannot explain what I was thinking, except that I really admired Neal Adams, and so one Friday I didn't have anything to do at the military base, and so I got on a train and I went to New York, and I somehow knew that Neal liked to hang around DC's offices. So I showed up around 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and said I'd like to talk to Neal Adams, and they went, because this was in a time when fans, there weren't any. I mean, it's like
A lot of readers.
they had no experience really with people actually showing up and being interested. But they checked with Neal, and Neal said, "Come back." And I talked to Neal, and I said, when I get out of the Army, I'd really like to, be your assistant, sir. And he said, why wait? And I said, because I'm in the Army. And he said, can you come up every weekend and work with me? And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. So I did that. And eventually I got out of the Army and went to New York. And I was in the Bronx with 6 people. Rich Buckler, Rich Buckler's mother.
Wow.
And a couple other people who, you wouldn't know their names at this point. They didn't really make it happen. But we were in a 6th floor walk-up in the Bronx. This was just about Christmas time. I had a car, which I parked on the street in New York, and then went to Indiana for a couple of weeks for Christmas. And when I came back, the battery was gone from my car.
Oh, God.
And I said, 6th floor walk up in a neighborhood like that? No. So I moved out. Sal Amendola, who did,
Oh, sure.
did Night of the Batman, his, still a famous thing that he did. He and I moved up to Connecticut at that point. And I was doing background stuff, little one-page mystery things. Because I was doing art, right? Well, I skipped a little bit, but I mean, Neal insisted that I have my name on this story that we did for Vampirella. Not a Vampirella story, but in the magazine. Because he said, then you'll have a published credit. And I mean, again, he was a tremendous guy. Neal was a tremendous guy. So I had a published credit. I came to New York. I already had published stuff, and I could go around. So I was working, trying to do art. And then the thing about New York in those days was you had to be there. There was no FedEx, there was no internet, so you had to be able to hand things to people. So even if you lived in Connecticut, you had to come in on the train and hand stuff to people.
And they were also at Marvel going from 8 books to 23 books a month.
Which is fascinating.
So
guys.
So we were
Yeah.
all getting hired at that point.
Right. And so, but I personally was still doing background stuff, and I was doing backgrounds for Bob Oxner on Supergirl, and I was doing Jimmy Olsen backgrounds, and I was, doing stuff for Giordano on Batman, and whatever. And then the thing about New York was everybody was there, and it was really cool because, everybody. Wally Wood I got to know.
Wow.
People who were there long before me, and nobody was treated any different from anybody. It didn't matter how long you'd been there or what you'd done. We were all comic book people together in New York, which I very much appreciated. In any event, I got to know Gary Friedrich, who wrote Nick Fury and Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and the summer after I got to New York and moved to Connecticut, a stewardess, now called a flight attendant, got murdered in the apartment above where Gary Friedrich lived, and his wife, who was from New York, said, I don't like this. Let's go back to Missouri, where you're from, for the summer, and I don't want to live where the murder was committed. And so Gary called me up, I guess because he knew I was, just doing things here and there. And he said, would you like to fill in for me for 6 weeks at Marvel? And he was the low man on the totem pole, and that's what he was offering me, the guy who would answer letters and do whatever. And I almost said no, because I was living so far up in Connecticut that it was 2 hours in and 2 hours out on the train every day. But I remember going and talking to Roy Thomas, and I said, well, I'll do it 4 days a week. And he said, okay, sure, what does he care? 6 weeks for a fill-in guy. But at the end of 6 weeks, Gary did not want to come back from Missouri, and he didn't want to do any more work. So he sent back this 6-page monster story that he was supposed to have written, but he didn't. And they just kind of looked around the office, Roy, I guess, and he's like, I don't know, you want to write this thing? And I said, sure.
Wait, are we talking about scripting it at this point?
Scripting it, yeah.
Okay, that's
Scripting
all.
it, yeah. Yeah, because it was drawn.
And it was
Sid
Nick
Shores.
Fury? And it was Nick Fury, or was it another
No,
title?
it was Sid Shores. It was a 6-page monster story.
Oh, okay, sure.
6-page monster story.
That's what they started everybody off.
Got it. Okay.
And so I went home that night and I wrote it, and I enjoyed the writing of it, and they liked what I wrote. So they said, oh, you want to do some more? And then, that's how my career started. In those days, you worked your way up to the superheroes. So I wrote romance stories, I wrote monster stories, I wrote Western stories. And eventually I wrote The Beast, and then,
Yep.
all that stuff went from there. So it was really, every step of the way, sort of right place, right time. You know what I mean? It's just like, I didn't do anything. I just, I was just I was
cast
the one
about
needed
by the
somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was not, so.
You know,
Well,
And we were all connected up. I mean, my
Yeah.
first cover was for one of his Beast stories.
okay.
Yeah, because I wasn't the only guy who was that age who showed up
Yeah.
at that time, right?
Oh,
No,
there's
a
a
bunch
whole
of us
influx
all
of
showed
Farmer,
up
there
at
was-
virtually
there
the
was
same
Steve
time.
Gerber, there was, Don McGregor, there was,
Barry Smith, Bernie Wrightson, Jeff
Yeah.
Jones, Mike Kaluta. I mean, all
there
these
was a
great
whole
artists.
group of us who had sort of grown up being comic fans and sort of all came of age right at that time and went to New York and did our thing.
Truly, guys, that's why your generation is so interesting, because prior to that, you had all the Mad Men, era kind of button-down guys, and I know this about you, Steve, and you're conscientious objector and everything, which is amazing.
But in
That
the Army?
yeah, and that's how you got, which is fantastic.
how I
Tell the
got
story,
out.
tell the story real fast, Steve, in terms of that you were able to get out with an honorable discharge. I assume.
Well, I got drafted when I got out of college. I went to Wesleyan right over in Middletown. I got out of college and I called up my draft board and I said, I've also been accepted at law school. Can I get a semester in? And they said, about 3 weeks before we come and get you. So I went into the Army, and I didn't really want to go, but it was like, what was I going to flee to Canada? It's just what you did, that's what young men had to do. But I got to know a guy in basic training who was also from Indianapolis, which is where I was from. I didn't know him in Indianapolis, but we bonded because of that. He gave me a lot of stuff because I was assigned to journalism school, and he was going to go, just be a foot soldier and get it over with. And he did, as a matter of fact. He died the first week he was in Vietnam, and that was the first time that I knew a guy who died.
Wow.
I was only 20,
Yeah.
21, whatever I was.
Yeah.
And that sort of made an impression upon me, that like, oh, okay. And then I was working in the journalism office in Maryland, and everybody there had already been to Vietnam, and they had nothing good to say about it. It was just like, no, it's a joke, it's a disaster, etc. So I sort of figured out eventually that this was not something that I wanted to do. So I applied to be a conscientious objector, and you had to be interviewed by a chaplain, by a shrink, and by an officer knowledgeable in matters pertaining to conscientious objection, of which there are none, because why would there be one, And so the shrink said I was sane, and the chaplain said I was sincere, and then the officer was a whack major, which seemed to me like the worst possible thing, because she would have had to have enlisted in the first place, and then she would have had to re-up in order to be a major.
Career person, yeah.
But not only did we had the thing, but I should mention that Neal Adams, again, on his own dime, came down from New York to testify on my behalf.
Wow.
That I was a cool
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
I don't know if being a cool guy would get you out of the Army.
well,
He's cool. Oh, you got
Yeah, all right, yeah, get out of here. We don't need cool
he's got
people.
the shades, Anyway, so in the end, she decided that I should get out, but it still had to be approved by the Pentagon, and there was like a month where I'm still there, and of course I'm persona non grata in the Army because I've been trying to do this, so everybody's, I was getting a lot of KP duty and, whatever. But in the end, the Pentagon said okay. But in that month, I would go over and see her because, we'd sort of talk face to face, and I'd say, well, so what is, will you hear anything, what's going on? Eventually, they let me out. They said, yep, I got an honorable discharge, but I don't get any benefits. Although I'm told that's changed now, but then who knows?
Sure.
In any event, I got out. I went to New York and moved in with Rich Buckler's mother at that point.
Something we all had to go through.
It's in the contract.
I only had Rich for one night.
But a memorable night, I'm sure. Anyway, just to wrap this up, a month later, I went back down to my Maryland base to see friends who were still there, and I was on my way to D.C., Washington, D.C. And I stopped in, and I wanted to go see the major, and I stopped by, and they said, oh, she opted to get out of the Army. And I think I talked her into it.
Nice going.
You're a bad influence,
So,
sir.
anyway.
That would get you on an enemies list today. you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would. So that's a very long.
No, but I loved it, and truly, again, guys, truly to have that kind of fear of getting drafted, and certainly during Vietnam and stuff, I can't imagine. So, but I am curious because you guys all worked on, like you said, to get started and everything, you had to work on these backup stories and other genres and things. But also, this was the period of like Vampirella, and I know later on Epic Illustrated, but also even did Thanos the creation of Thanos? That was like. Well, I know in Iron Man, you put him in Iron Man, but didn't you also create him prior to putting him in Iron Man?
Yeah, he was in my portfolio when I got work up at Marvel, and when Roy asked me if I wanted to do it, I said, "Oh, I want you to do this guy in here." And he said, "Fine." Talking with Mike, and Mike said, "Hey, we'll talk about it when we get back to the house tonight." And by the time he got back to the house tonight, I had 3 pages penciled.
Beautiful.
So it got out of control.
Hard to back out then.
And
Did
I
you-
said, sure, if you want us to own it, go right ahead.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they didn't keep the paperwork, so it worked
really?
out okay for me in the long run.
Which is so great, Jim, truly. And that's, because you've seen the other guys and the things they've created and not getting compensated for it. So we're all thrilled that,
Yeah,
Things
the
worked
movie
out for you.
people have been real nice to me. I gotta
Beautiful.
say that. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's great. But that era of Epic Illustrated and all the Warren magazines, did you guys do Warren stuff and everything?
Occasionally, yeah.
Well, that first story I did with Neal appeared in the Vampirella magazine,
As you said.
and then I wrote Vampirella for 4 issues.
Okay.
Only 3 of which appeared because the 4th one got lost in the mail, and that's when I learned always make a backup.
Who drew it back then? Do you remember?
It was Gonzalez,
Okay.
Spanish guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, very good, yeah.
It was gorgeous.
But like Epic Illustrated, were you guys, was science fiction something you guys wanted to do? Or was it just another genre?
I always liked science fiction because you didn't have to draw any horses or cars.
Was that really? Was that
That's
basic?
my standard answer.
But all the world building that you did. Pardon me, I'm spitting.
Yeah,
But-
well, it was more fun doing spaceships and creating societies than it was drawing cars.
Which came first?
Which is unusual from a guy from the Detroit area, by the way. If
I'm
anything, he should have been.
Really?
Most guys
Rebelling.
that do draw in the Michigan, do
For the big
auto
three.
design.
Yeah. Yeah, for GM or
Ads.
whatever. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why I had to leave.
That's right. That's
Just
right.
don't like drawing cars. Sorry, I'm going.
Can't go to Wyoming. I don't like horses.
So-
We were excommunicated,
Horses
basically.
are even harder to draw than cars.
Oh yeah.
Did you ever, Al? Did you ever do any of that, Vampire, Warren magazines, or
I-
non-Marvel assignments?
I did some stuff for Warren, mostly because I think Dubé was our roommate, so
Sure.
I had that in, and I did some inking on some. I don't remember who it was over. Might have been Buckler. I'm not sure, but I did. And Dubé had devised this way of doing it that was completely off the wall. Instead of having pages penciled on paper, he would, well, I guess they were penciled on paper, but then he would have the inker ink them on some, that would be my wife.
Don't worry about it.
I'm about to say something wrong. I don't know what. Excuse me 1 second. Honey, I'm on a panel. I'll call you later. Yeah. No, it started at 5. Thank you. Goodbye, dear.
That was fantastic.
He's in so much trouble now.
Yeah, exactly. Frying pan in the face, waiting for you, Al.
I've taken in some pretty good money so far today.
Oh, there you go.
I'll be okay. I'll have to buy a new bathroom, but other than that, I'll be okay.
So then he would have these pages inked on this. It wasn't exactly vellum. It was some other plasticky sort of material. So you'd ink that, and then because the books were black and white, they had to be toned. So then he would paint on the backs of the pages, because it was translucent, various gray tones. So you had to ink it on the thing and then flip the thing over and put in the gray tones so that it would reproduce well in a black and white book. And it was a big pain in the butt, but and I did some of that. I remember very distinctly he was also giving work at the time to Klaus Janson. And he showed me some of Klaus's work. And he says, well, look, you can ink better than this guy, right? And I went, I don't think so. But, you know, he was my roommate, so he said, oh, no, you can. I said, if you, whatever, I'll try, you know, so I did it. And but then I actually ended up doing a little bit of writing for Bill. I created the least known swamp creature. You've heard of Man-Thing, you've heard of Swamp Thing, maybe you've heard of the Heap.
Yep.
You know, from back in the
Golden
40s and 50s.
Yep.
But then Skywald stole him because he was in public domain, and they did Heap stories. Well, I did a character called Marvin the Dead Thing. Anybody ever heard of Marvin? No, it's a shame.
I don't even remember.
You don't remember that one. I'll give you a copy. Anyway, it was, and it had, the gist of it was, swamp monster, you know, guy dies in the swamp, and he's terribly sad and lonely, and he befriends a little girl, and he doesn't kill her or do anything terrible. And the last panel I remember is the two of them skipping along in the swamp together. So it had more of my sense of humor, I guess. But I did it as a one-off, and then they decided that he was cool, and they did a series about him for a while. I don't even know what they did with him. But I did that for, you know, I think I must have done a few of those, and then somebody else took it over, and they had a lot of international artists, and they were buying stuff where they would just take the artwork and write a new story to fit whatever the artwork was. Sure. And I remember I did one of those, and I just, you know, I think it was competent, but there were very large balloons. And so I felt like I had to sort of fill, instead of having a giant balloon with a little bit of copy in the middle, I felt like I had to fill up every square inch of the balloons. So it was the most, you know, verbose, grandiose, purple prose kind of stuff you'd ever want to read. And, you know, I did that on maybe one or two jobs as well. So I actually did do a little work for Warren. Later, when Louise Jones was the editor up there, I, along with every other inker in creation, inked some Carmine Infantino stuff for Warren also. Gotcha. And that was a treat, because I was a big fan of Carmine's work, and he was, you know, after they fired him up at DC, and I thought he was doing a pretty good job at DC. Very interesting stuff, very offbeat, but it wasn't doing well against the Marvel dreadnought, so they finally let him go and, you know, replaced him with Jeanette Kahn, and so suddenly he was back to freelancing as a cartoonist, which was good for all of us comic art fans, but I think Carmine was not happy with his fate. So,
do you folks, if you got questions, I'll ask you to start lining up.
Oh, can I just say one quick thing?
Of course.
Not that I don't talk too much as it is, but mentioning the different genres and offbeat stuff that many of us did early on. How many of you know that one of his very first jobs he ever did for Marvel was a romance story?
I didn't know that.
Jim, do you know that?
Our Love, that had Dick the Dude, Tom the Truck Driver, and Wendy the Waitress.
There you go.
There was a little bit of alliteration in that story.
Inked by Jack Abel, I think.
Inked by Jack Abel, and
Look great.
written by Gary Friedrich.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Oh, it all ties together. Goodbye, folks.
There you go. No, that's fantastic.
And after that, Gary didn't want to write anything anymore.
Yeah, I ruined a lot of careers like that.
Back to Missouri.
So, changing Captain Marvel from green to white to eventually the blonde-haired, blue and red, and everything else with Captain Marvel. How early were you able to jump in and, all right, I'm fixing this character and making him the character that we all know and love?
Dead.
Okay.
Well, before that part, that's a great story too. Don't get me wrong.
Okay,
it's a brilliant story.
I got fired by Stan Lee on my second issue of Iron Man. He fired me and Steve Gerber both, and Roy decided he was going to make up for it. So he gave Gerber Man-Thing to do, and then he came to me and he said, "We got this book that's probably going to get discontinued before you ever get your first issue done." But we'll put you on it, and we'll see what happens.
Sure.
And that was Captain Marvel, and the sales went up, and so I had a steady gig for a while until I quit. Yeah, that was basically it.
Was Thanos always part of the plan of eventually putting him in Captain Marvel?
Yeah, Marvel thought they were hiring me to do Iron Man or Captain Marvel or Warlock or Silver Surfer.
Yeah.
It was always Thanos was always going to come into it.
Cool.
Nobody else wanted to work on the character. He went around for years, decades, with me the only one who ever did it. I think Ron Mars got a couple stories because we were buddies.
Okay.
But nobody else wanted to do it. And then the movie came out, and they didn't want me to do it anymore. Anybody but you, Jim.
Crazy.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Steve, when you were doing Avengers and you were touching on the Kree-Skrull War and everything, the Celestial, the Mantis story and everything, so was that prior to Jim starting to mess with Marvel and everything, with Captain Marvel, or was that same time?
Well, Steve actually scripted in the second to last story or something like that of that story.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the timeline to answer that question, but yeah, Jim was doing the Captain Marvel, and then this is the way I understand it. Feel free to correct me. But you felt that you could maybe be a better writer if you took a little more time and thought about it. So you asked me to write it while you stepped back from that thing. And then he quit, and then me and Al were doing Captain Marvel.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a couple issues in between there, but basically, I wanted to see what you were doing. You were a good writer, and I said, okay, let's put him. Now learn something, So we did that for that one issue.
Yeah.
And it worked out fine.
To do. I mean, who else would do that, right?
Only lunatics.
We got a question, please, sir.
So my question's for Steve. With your run on Cap, going through Secret Empire,
We want
Captain
to talk
Nomad,
about Secret Empire, indeed. Absolutely.
Nomad. I mean, that was a big status change for a long time character.
Well-
Was there any concern or discussion?
Yeah,
about
pushback from
doing that
editorial.
story?
No.
Let's remind people, Secret Empire, big swing at Nixon during Watergate.
Yeah. Well, when I took over Captain Marvel, I got the same speech that Jim did about I took Captain America. He got Captain Marvel, but they said this book is nobody's figured out how to make this book work. It's it's either going to go bi-monthly or it's going to get canceled. You're the low man on the totem pole. See if you can think of something. And so I thought of something of having him stand for the American ideals, and that turned his fate around and has become sort of the template ever since, right? But what Roy said to me also when he gave me the book was, there's two things you have to do. You have to turn it in on time every month, and you have to make it sell. And if you can do that, then we don't care what you do.
Wow.
And it was seriously, and I got to back it up to say that when Roy and Denny were hired by Stan made them sound like him. Because everything had sounded like him to that point, and he didn't want to change that.
From a writing standpoint.
From a writing standpoint. And so he made Roy and Denny write like him, and he would grill them and train. So it's amazing. Maybe not, if but I mean, the fact that when Roy took over, Roy just said, you guys can do anything you want to do, so long as it sells and you don't miss deadlines.
There was no assistant editors at that.
Right.
This is Roy doing everything himself.
Right. Us writers did our own letters pages. I mean, we were the editors, basically, of our own books. And so the answer to your question is, nobody, the book was selling and I was turning it in on time, and they didn't care what else I did. So that's how that happened. And then Watergate happened, and for those of you who weren't there, it was a big deal, and it was on television every day, and Americans were all tuned in to watch the live hearings, which were conducted by statesmen back when people on both sides of the aisle, even whatever their predilections, still thought it was a serious thing that they had to deal with. And so it just made no sense to me that if Captain America, who I had very innocently established as caring about the ideals of America, that he would just keep on fighting the Yellow Claw during the course of all this. And we're supposed to be living in the real world. The Marvel universe was supposed to be, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, I thought I should do something. So I had this anagram for Watergate, and that story took as long as it took, and then Nixon was still the president, but it was clear he was not going to be for much longer. But I couldn't kill Nixon himself on stage in a comic book and so forth. So I
did it off panel.
Yeah, I did it off panel.
Exactly.
Right. We never said who it was. And then that just led, when I write characters, I just like to let them tell me what's going on, you know? I mean, the Captain America who I had chronicled to that point couldn't take, he'd given his life to those ideals, and here was the president doing this kind of stuff, so he decided he was not going to do that anymore. But he was still a hero, so he became Nomad. I mean, it was logical. And I knew, is Captain America going to come back at some point? Of course Captain America is going to come back at some point. But I thought, how long can I string this out? How long can I make this work without a Captain America in the Captain America book?
When he was Nomad, obviously.
Yeah, when he was Nomad, yeah. And I ran that as far as long it felt like I should, and then Captain America came back. But that was all, and people say, did they tell you can't do Nixon? No, that was me, because I thought, I can't do Nixon, So.
It was a great story.
Oh, are you kidding? Yeah. Oh my God, yeah. Epic story, absolutely, man. Sir, please come on up.
Yes, I don't know how much it's a
Go right
question.
to the microphone if you don't mind.
I don't know how much it's a question, but to Steve, with the Avengers Defenders War
Yes.
from a long time, I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever read, and I again, back then, you weren't necessarily getting comics on a regular basis, so there was holes in the gap, but I can't tell you how many years I had spent trying to catch up with the various issues. So I know I had gotten it a long time ago. So I guess I want to say thank you. And I guess if there was a question with all the, big crossover events, so that one was very small, like 8 issues or something like that. So do you want to take blame for all the 50
Well,
that's come out of it?
They've done the JLA, JSA stuff before me,
That's true.
before that time. But,
Yeah.
the other book that I got when I was handed Captain America was The Defenders, and I really liked doing The Defenders. And then a couple months later, Roy gave up the Avengers and he gave it to me, which I thought was a nice vote of confidence and so forth. But then I was writing both of them, and we got to the summertime, and Marvel said they weren't going to do any annuals that year. And I had always loved the annuals in the summertime, and I thought, well, then there ought to be something special about this summer. And I thought about doing my 2 teams together, and I went to Roy, and I said, this is what I want to do. And Roy said, if you miss any deadline, everything will topple over like dominoes. And I said, I won't do that. And he said, okay. And that's, that was the editorial oversight on it. So I just wanted to do something special for that summer. And I controlled most of the Marvel heroes at that point. So that's what I did.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Steve, you kind of answered my question, but this is for the whole panel. Was there a story that you wanted to do but couldn't do based on editorial, or because I know some of you were editors, but was there a story that you wanted to do that higher up said no, or that you didn't want to do that you had to do? For the whole panel.
I wanted to do a Namor story after 9/11. It was going to be sort of a thoughtful essay on the balance of power and misunderstandings, and more of an intellectual look. Atlantis was going to be destroyed, and Namor was going to be off trying to find out what was going on. I had planned on Nelson Mandela being a guest star in it at the time.
Wow.
But it wasn't jingoistic enough or anti-Arab enough for Marvel, so they sat on it for a year, and they eventually said we're going to do Namor in Love. How many of you remember Namor
Oh,
in
Andy
Love?
Watson. Yeah, the teen Namor.
You actually remember?
Sadly, I
Okay.
do.
And so I never got to do that story, and that was the one story I would have liked to have done.
Yeah, that was that weird experimental time when Jemis and Casado were really trying anything. Yeah, Al, please.
No, I got nothing.
Okay.
I mean, when Jim quit Captain Marvel, and I'm actually curious what prompted that at the time, because then you went over to DC for a while, yes?
Yeah, I mean, there was different inkers every month.
Oh, just the different inkers.
That was it. You mean?
Wow, boy, what a fussy penciler he is.
Yeah.
I mean, you mostly had pretty good inkers, though.
Yeah. But,
Jack, you just wanted the consistency.
I had been promised that Klaus was going to be it, and soon he got the one issue off, and they gave him away, and I went, okay, never mind.
Oh, okay. But and then they hired Steve and myself to continue the book.
Yeah.
So it took two of us to do what Jim was doing by himself. And but I thought that was a nice. I think they thought, well, Milgrom kind of draws like Starlin, so we'll get him. Sure. Nobody will notice that Jim's gone. And Steve's a very good writer and very offbeat, creative ideas. He thinks outside the box almost all the time. And so I thought we had a very nice run on the character, and I enjoyed that. But you were out west still, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, he went back out to the Bay Area, and I was in New York, and we did not communicate overly much.
Right. It was a bi-monthly book, and so we would every time
Yeah.
something was ready to do, we'd get on the phone and try to plot something really complex over the course of some conversation, which didn't always work out.
Yeah, I have the sense that you mostly just wrote it, and then I just drew it. I don't remember a lot of give and take on it.
But I think it changed because when you did like the Space Cowboy and stuff like that, it sort of switched over to where you were plotting it, and I was just.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dialogue. Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
But
I
as you can see, it wasn't a finely meshed.
no, it was not.
Right.
Who was editing you guys when you were collaborating from so
I
far
have
away?
no recollection whatsoever.
All right.
Did
and I
we
mean, it
have-
was the carousel of editors, I think. Back
Well,
in
it
that
was,
era.
and Steve mentioned earlier about basically editing his own stuff.
Sure.
And that became sort of, Marvel went from being Stan Lee was the editor of all the titles and writing a good percentage of them, but that's when it was a finite. They were only allowed to do 8 titles a month, I think.
Yeah.
The distributor,
Yes.
which was DC Comics distributor, they were, I don't know who owned which, but they were completely connected. And they, for some reason, they said, well, we'll also distribute your comics, Marvel, but no more than 8 books a month. And once Marvel started, taking off and hitting it big and doing better and better with more and more characters, that's why they had those split books for as long as they did. They weren't allowed to have new titles. So they had the, Tales of Suspense and Tales to Astonish and Journey into Mystery and, Strange Tales. And they were all, 2 different characters.
Yep.
Each getting half the book. And they finally they said, well, look, we really want to expand. And Independent News said, no, you're not allowed. This is it, just 8 books a month. And they said, well, and they found another distributor. Curtis, was it? Curtis.
It was Curtis, absolutely.
And boom, the Marvel, Big Bang explosion just took off. They, everybody, instead of being in a half a book, got their own title. And they kept introducing new characters. And, frequently they were supporting characters who somebody decided, oh, we could really do something with him and make him a lead character. And, then it just mushroomed from there. So,
Gotcha.
But what I was getting to originally was that Stan had been the whole shebang, and then Roy, when he was, Stan went out west to try and sell Marvel to Hollywood, and Roy became the whole shebang, and even he realized that as it was expanding, one man could not do the job, and so Roy went back to freelancing writing and doing Conan and introducing, which was a big property for Marvel, I think, in the time. But then there was a whole string of, Len Wein was editor-in-chief for a while, and Marv Wolfman was editor-in-chief for a while, and Jerry Conway was editor-in-chief for 12 minutes. Yeah. And I mean, I'm barely exaggerating.
Yeah.
I think it was a month, maybe.
2 weeks.
We're
We're going to cover that tomorrow in the Shooter Tribute panel.
For me to quit again.
Just long enough to piss Jim off again.
Exactly.
It's too bad there weren't more comic companies, because he could have
Was
ping-ponged all over the place.
Was that nutty for you guys as you were doing your books, Henry? Because you're Doctor Strange and everything you're doing and everything, and to
the Cosmic Code Authority.
Indeed.
I mean, Jerry and I are friends now, but I mean it was, Jerry took over, and he decided he wanted to write the Avengers and the Defenders, so he took one from me and one from Gerber, and I said,
two, didn't you?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
that's
I
Yeah.
said, no, that's why I ended up over at DC doing
Wow.
Batman and stuff.
Well, again, us DC. I mean, I'm a Marvel fan as well, but us DC fans are glad you guys came over because you guys did amazing work at DC as well. So.
Well, and the thing was that each of these editors-in-chief, when they finally realized, oh, this is a thankless job, they would quit. They would quit, but then they'd say, well, now I'm going to write and edit my own stuff on these 4 titles, 6 titles. I think Jerry took, 9 or 12 titles. I mean, it was more than a human could write in a month. And so each one of these guys, and then, of course, the whole point of an editor, it's tough to be a self-editor because, how much are you going to yell at yourself? How hard are you going to crack that whip to get you to do stuff, either better stuff or on time stuff or whatever the criteria might be. So, so each one of them, was doing their own little fiefdom of several books. And meanwhile, Marvel, the books were getting later and later, and they were missing deadlines, helter skelter and yan, and Conway again, 2 weeks. Although I do owe him a vote of thanks. One of the things he did in his 2 weeks in charge is he had me doing cover sketches for Jack Kirby. And why, you may ask? That's what I asked. But, he said, well, Jack was now back from doing the stuff at DC, the Fourth World stuff. And he said, yeah, we want to have Jack, like in the old days, doing the covers for as many books as we can have done, because who does a better comic book cover than Jack Kirby? No one. And so so I said, well, why does Jack Kirby need me to do cover sketches for him? It's absurd. And he said, no, it's just that we don't want to have to ship hundreds of pages of photocopies out to the West Coast and then waste Jack's time looking through all these issues to find the cover scene that he thinks would be best. So I said, oh, so I can waste my time doing that. He says, exactly. So that was the deal. I did a bunch of cover sketches for Kirby, which he stuck to pretty closely, although I was doing my best, Jack Kirby impression on the sketches. And the only deal I made, because I never got any originals back from those, Jack was getting all the originals for whatever, I guess he cut a special deal with Marvel and nobody told me. But the thing was that I said, well, look, if Jack does covers based on my sketches, I'd like to ink his pencils. So I thought maybe I'd get an original or two. But anyway, and Jerry said, oh, yeah, we love your inking. That's fine. So I got to work with Jack Kirby, who's, my all-time fave.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you can't beat Jack Kirby. Anyway, so he accomplished that. And then somewhere in there, Archie Goodwin was also editor-in-chief for maybe a year, I think. Anyway, and then finally, Archie, I think Archie was pissed because they promoted Jerry to the position before he was. So then Archie did it, and he said, why did I want this? So he went back into editing maybe Epic and writing whatever stuff he was writing. And there was an assistant up at the office at the time named Jim Shooter, and more about him at a panel later this week.
Tomorrow.
But, Jim had come up at the age of 13 or 14 years old. He was writing professional comics for DC, and he learned under Mort Weisinger's, aegis. And is that the right use of that word? Yeah, good.
Mort was a monster.
He was a monster, and Jim admired him quite a bit. But he was a very successful comic book editor.
Sure.
With the whole idea, the concept of coming up with a cover shot and then writing a story based on it. So they just sat around thinking up what would be a cool story. What if Super Baby, had a rattle and he broke the planet with it or something. So it would make for an eye-catching cover, and they sold a lot of books, and then they would come up with a story to fit and so on. So Shooter was writing professionally for DC. Now he was working as an assistant editor up at Marvel. Finally, the carousel came around, and he was tagged it, and he went to the people upstairs. He said, "Look, like I said, all the editor-writers or writer-editors were screwing up their deadlines, and they were missing their shipping dates, they were missing their engraving dates, all the other people who put the comic together after the creative people, and they were charging the distributors, everybody, they were getting late fees left and right. And Jim went up and said, look, I can't fix this unless I have an editorial staff. And so they said, oh my God, so all these years we've been paying just one guy to be editor-in-chief. And he says, yeah, but how much are you paying in late fees and penalties every month? And they said, oh yeah, gee, gosh, if we could save all that money, we could afford an editorial staff and actually, make more money. So he hired me, he hired, I don't think I was the first, he hired Salicrup, he hired Grunwald, he hired me, and after I came in, both Larry Hama and I had been editors at DC briefly, and so for some reason Jim hired me first. Larry clearly was the better editor, but he said, do you think Larry would like to, get on staff here? And I said, oh, call him, ask him. He said, nah, take him out to lunch and sound him out. So I took him out to lunch, and we had a nice leisurely lunch, discussing nothing about comics at all. And then at the end I said, by the way, Larry, Shooter wants to know if you're interested in being an editor at Marvel now. And he said, oh yeah, maybe. I'll talk to him. And so he got hired, and he hired Wheezy, Louise Jones, who was editing the Warren books at the time. So he put together a pretty good powerhouse editorial staff, and then slowly but surely we got all the books back on schedule, so you weren't having reprints from like a year and a half ago and stuff like that, and the books got to be on time. And then Jim wanted them all to be perfect, but that's another story. So, he did really good things, and he did very good things for a lot of the freelancers also. DC introduced the idea of royalty payments, and Shooter went up to the powers at Marvel and said, look, if we don't match DC's deal, all our talent's going to leave and go work for DC. And he convinced them, because they had a lot more to lose than DC did. DC had very few books that would have paid royalties at that period. And they were hoping if they could lure over the Marvel talent, then their books would sell well enough to warrant some of these royalties they were promising.
Yeah, jump in, Jim.
Actually, Roy Friedrichs and I were working on the royalty thing when DC beat us to it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, is that what happened? I
we-
never
there you
heard
go.
that before.
Mike kept throwing things in that was botching it up, but he was looking out for Marvel, and even Mike Hobson up there was going, no, set something up right, and they only beat it because
You guys were spinning your wheels a little.
a little bit, but this was Shooter's doing too. I mean,
Yeah, there you
he
go.
was the main force on it.
Al, forgive me, because we're up against the clock, and this poor gentleman's been waiting for so long, so I just want to get him in there.
I want to see his legs just buckle under him. That's
Oh.
why I've been stalling.
Were any of you wooed by Atlas Comics, or did Atlas?
Ooh, that's a great
Or did
great
Atlas somehow
question.
impact what Marvel and DC?
Do we know about Atlas real fast? It was Chip Goodman, Marvin Goodman's son.
Originally, Atlas was Marvel's.
Was it Marvin himself?
Was Marvel's imprint in the 50s.
Oh, there. Yeah,
it
of
was
course
Atlas Comics.
Yeah, but we're talking about 70s Atlas.
Martin Goodman, who was the publisher and owner of Marvel, sold the company and made a tidy sum, nothing like what Disney paid for it, but and then apparently, I believe I heard this, they were supposed to keep his son, Chip, employed, and they did not. And I think Chip may not have been the greatest talent in the industry. He was there because his dad said, give him a job, and then they decided they didn't want him in the job. So his dad created a new comic book company, and he used the Atlas name and put Chip in charge of it. And so they did a whole line of comics. They were offering higher rates, which was surprising because both Marvel and DC always said, oh, we can't afford to pay anymore. You guys are getting the top rate.
Sure.
This is it. That's not. We can't go high. We'll bankrupt. No. Here was this, brand new company that was paying better rates than either company. Of course, it failed badly, and they had a lot of very, very freaky, offbeat, strange characters. Many of them written by Michael Fleischer.
Sure.
Who had
Al, forgive me. We literally are up against the clock. Did you get any offers from Atlas?
I worked for Atlas.
What did you do for Atlas?
It was Morlock 2000.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
I did exactly 2 issues, and then I fled back to Marvel.
I respect that. Jim,
Yeah.
did they jump after you? No? Steve? No?
No.
Excellent. We answered the question. And also, again, butt up against time.
Yeah.
Please go to their tables. Ask them more. But I will ask you guys
Just
right
throw
now,
money at us.
For the purpose.
Don't ask questions. Just pay.
Jim, you're in the midst of the Dreadstar magnum opus and everything still?
Finished the pencils on it. I'm just waiting for the publisher. He got sick, and so we're beginning to
Which issue is
start
this?
the things. There should be a Kickstarter for the 3rd book sometime in the next couple weeks.
Excellent. Steve, you're back in comics already and working on your own stuff?
Yeah, doing my own stuff. I just like to write, and even though I gave up, I haven't worked for the Marvel since 20 years now, maybe something like that. But I just continued to write stuff that interested me, and I wasn't worried about could I sell it? Did it, is it commercial? It's just like this is an interesting thing to write. My magnum opus, I'll be brief. My magnum opus was I wanted to do a story called Secret Identities, in which I have like 20 ongoing characters. It's a small town in California, and there's all these people in it, and all of a sudden 2 of them become superheroes, but I don't tell you which 2. And so we're still following these 20 people going about their lives, but meanwhile 2 of them are not showing us everything. And I thought, can I pull this off? Can I do this where I can write 20 different stories and they don't all climax at the same time, and some of them are love stories and some of them are superhero stories, and I did it because there was this pandemic that gave me a lot of time.
I heard about it.
And I got done with it, and then I said, wait a minute. So the way it worked out was 7 60-page stories, and I said, George Perez is dead. There's nobody who's ever going to draw something with 20 ongoing characters over 420 pages. So it's that kind of stuff. But oddly enough, DC has now said we might be interested in doing that. But I mean, this is so totally tentative. I wouldn't, rush right out to make any money on it. But, but it might happen.
I understand. Al is taking commissions and Carver recreations and has his website, correct, Al?
I have no website.
Oh, so how did they get in contact with you, Al?
I have no idea.
Yes, you do. You
No,
told
I don't
me
know.
2 weeks
People,
ago.
no.
You don't want to give your email to these fine people?
Well, we did this interview. And
yeah, but I'm saying for the people who are here now that might want to hit you up.
Sure.
Go to your table, of course.
You can contact me through my email. I don't have a website. I don't have a website or whatever. So my email is, I want everybody to write this down. I don't see any pencils out. It's editorial, not to be confused with editorial. Editorial 4, and that's the numeral, not spelled out, editorial 4 at AOL.com.
There you go.
And if you, in the subject line, you write commission or Terrificon, I will respond, and I will assume you're not trying to send me a virus.
All right, Polito is waiting for us, and I appreciate everybody talking and listening. Thank you very much.